But something felt different that night. The applause came fast yet uneven. Some people clapped because they agreed. Others clapped because they were waiting for the response, waiting for the collision. And standing only a few feet away was Barack Obama, calm, silent, watching, not interrupting, not reacting, just listening long enough for the room to hear how desperately the word genius was trying to carry the weight of an entire identity. That was the first shift because Trump expected resistance. He expected outrage. He expected statistics. Maybe a fight about grades, universities, intelligence tests, or political accomplishments. Maybe Obama would mention Harvard. Maybe he would mention the Constitution lectures. Maybe he would remind the audience who spent 8 years inside the Oval Office making life and death decisions every morning before sunrise. That would have been predictable. But Obama understood something far more dangerous. When a man repeats, "I'm a genius," often enough, the real question is no longer whether it's true. The real question becomes, why does he need strangers to keep confirming it? And suddenly the room wasn't watching a political argument anymore. It was watching a psychological one. Donald Trump isn't going to suddenly protect all of us. He can't even take the basic steps to protect himself. There's no sense that he's coming up with a new approach, with a new plan. He doesn't even acknowledge that there's a problem. The audience shifted in their seats because that line did something subtle. It stopped being about intelligence and started being about responsibility. Trump still smiled, but it looked tighter, now smaller, like he could already feel the direction changing. Then Obama finally stood. No dramatic movement, no theatrical pause, just a slow walk to the microphone while the room held its breath. And then he said the line that instantly changed everything. "Donald, genius is not what you call yourself when people are clapping. Genius is what remains when the clapping stops and the consequences begin. Silence. Real silence, not television silence, not polite silence, the kind of silence where people suddenly realize they're witnessing a moment that will live longer than the event itself." Then the room exploded. Some people stood immediately. Others looked around, first almost shocked at what they had just heard because Obama hadn't insulted Trump. That's what made it devastating. He moved the measurement itself. Trump wanted the audience focused on labels. Obama forced them to focus on outcomes. And once that happened, everything changed because suddenly people weren't asking whether Trump sounded smart. They were asking whether his decisions made people safer, whether families were better off, whether the country felt steadier, whether leadership was producing calm or chaos. A leader can claim any IQ he wants, but families do not live inside that number. They live inside decisions, prices, wars, schools, hospitals, and the tone set by the person asking for power. And that line hit older viewers especially hard because they had lived long enough to recognize the difference between confidence and wisdom. They had met loud men before, bosses who talked over everyone, executives who confused volume with confidence, salesmen who used certainty like camouflage, people who always had an answer, especially when they didn't actually understand the question. Obama understood that memory, and he leaned directly into it. Stay with this, because that is where the boast started to shrink. Obama explained that intelligence in public life is not a trophy placed on your own shelf. It is not a nickname, a slogan, or a number repeated until critics get tired. The audience listened differently now. Even Trump supporters were quieter because this no longer sounded like politics. It sounded personal. And a lot of people count on us getting it right. And it's not a matter of pandering and doing whatever will get you in the news on a given day. And sometimes it requires you making hard decisions even when people don't like it and doing things that are unpopular. That line landed heavily because everyone in that room knew exactly what he meant without him saying it directly. The endless headlines, the constant outrage cycles, the obsession with attention. Obama never needed to raise his voice. That was the strange power of it. The calmer he sounded, the louder the contrast became. Real intelligence listens before acting. It studies consequences before chasing applause. It can hear experts without feeling insulted, admit uncertainty without collapsing, and accept correction without calling the entire system corrupt. That was the first real crack. You could actually see it on Trump's face. The grin remained, but the rhythm disappeared because suddenly he was trapped inside a test he didn't prepare for. If he repeated genius IQ, it sounded defensive. Now, if he attacked Obama, he proved Obama's point about insecurity. If he changed subjects, everyone would notice the escape. Obama had quietly built a cage using calmness alone, and millions watching at home could feel it. But then Obama made the conversation even more dangerous. He brought ordinary Americans into it, not elites, not pundits, not cable hosts, regular people, the people politicians usually talk about but rarely seem to understand. Obama asked what a genius IQ does for a retired couple watching medicine prices rise. What does it do for a teacher buying classroom supplies with her own paycheck? What does it do for a veteran waiting months for care? What does it do for parents pretending not to panic while checking grocery prices? What does it do for workers calculating whether rent or electricity gets paid first? Nothing, because a score does not lower bills. A score does not calm a crisis. A score does not comfort grieving families. A score does not replace judgment. And suddenly the word genius started sounding strangely empty, like a billboard with nothing behind it. For older Americans, watching the line carried weight. They had known loud men who confused certainty with intelligence. They had seen bosses, salesmen, celebrities, and politicians use confidence like armor. They know the smartest person in the room is not always the one announcing it. And then Obama slowed down even more, almost conversational. Sometimes wisdom is quiet, sometimes it listens, sometimes it says, "I was wrong," and then fixes what went wrong. That line hit differently because politics almost never rewards humility anymore. Public figures double down, deflect, attack, blame, spin. But admitting fault, correcting mistakes, that requires something deeper than confidence. And the audience could feel Obama pointing at something bigger than Trump himself. He was talking about leadership, about ego, about what happens when power becomes addicted to applause. Then came the line that changed the energy in the room permanently. Obama then gave the line that made the applause turn heavier. He said, "If your intelligence only helps you call others stupid, then it has not become wisdom yet." The crowd erupted again, but this applause sounded different, less playful, more recognizing. People weren't reacting to a clever insult anymore. They were reacting to recognition because they had seen it. The nicknames, the mocking, the low IQ attacks, the endless need to reduce every disagreement into humiliation. Trump had used intelligence like a weapon. Low IQ critics, dumb opponents, weak reporters, overrated experts. Every disagreement became proof that someone else was inferior instead of proof that the argument deserved an answer. Obama exposed that pattern without ever sounding angry, and that's what made it powerful. He wasn't fighting Trump emotionally, he was dissecting him calmly. The room understood the reversal instantly. Trump wanted a crown. Obama asked for service. Trump wanted admiration. Obama asked whether the admiration had improved anyone's life. Trump wanted validation. Obama asked whether validation creates wisdom. And then Obama delivered the moment nobody expected. He stopped talking entirely. Just silence. A long one. Long enough to become uncomfortable. Trump looked toward the audience, then toward Obama, then back toward the crowd again. And for the first time all night, he looked uncertain, only for a second, but viewers caught it. That hesitation spread across social media almost immediately. People replayed the clip frame by frame, not because Trump had been destroyed with some loud insult, but because Obama had done something psychologically devastating. He made confidence look fragile. And once audiences see fragility, they can't unsee it. But the night still wasn't over because Obama had one final turn left, one final point that transformed the entire conversation from politics into legacy. He leaned toward the microphone one last time, and his tone became almost reflective, like he wasn't even speaking to Trump anymore, like he was speaking directly to the country. He said, "Leadership is not measured by how strongly a person believes in himself. It is measured by how safe people feel under his decisions, how steady markets remain during panic, how honestly crises are addressed, how respectfully disagreement is handled, how much unnecessary fear enters ordinary homes because of the words coming from powerful people." The room stayed silent again because now everyone understood the real target, not intelligence, character. Obama wasn't arguing that Trump lacked intelligence. He was arguing something far more unsettling, that intelligence without discipline becomes ego, intelligence without humility becomes instability, intelligence without empathy becomes performance. And intelligence obsessed with praise eventually stops listening altogether. That realization hit the audience like slow thunder. People weren't just hearing criticism, they were hearing a warning. And suddenly Trump's repeated genius IQ claim started sounding less like confidence and more like reassurance, like someone constantly trying to convince himself first. By the end, Trump's genius IQ claim no longer sounded powerful. It sounded overworked, like a slogan trying to do the job of evidence. Obama did not need a secret score, a folder, or a leaked record. He only needed to ask whether intelligence had turned into judgment. And that question stayed in the room long after the cameras should have moved on, because everyone watching understood something uncomfortable. Most people have met someone who desperately needed to be seen as the smartest person in the room. And most people also know how exhausting that becomes. The constant self-promotion, the inability to admit mistakes, the need to win every conversation, the obsession with looking strong instead of becoming wise. That is why the moment stayed with viewers. Trump claimed genius IQ, but Obama's response shocked everyone because it changed the test. The real measure was not how loudly a man praised his own mind. It was whether that mind made people feel safer, steadier, and more respected. And suddenly, millions of viewers weren't debating IQ anymore. They were debating maturity, discipline, temperament, judgment under pressure, the things no cognitive test can fully measure. Under the lights, Obama did not win by proving he was smarter. He won by showing what real intelligence is supposed to become: humility, discipline, service, restraint, and truth when the room is no longer cheering. But the final image of the night was the part viewers remembered most. Not the applause, not the headlines, not the viral clips. It was the expression on Trump's face after the crowd settled down. Because for one brief moment, the performance stopped. And in that tiny crack of silence, the audience saw two completely different relationships with power standing side by side. One man needed the room to keep validating him. The other man seemed willing to let the room judge him by consequences alone. That contrast lingered. It followed people home, into comment sections, into family discussions, into late-night conversations between people who suddenly realized this debate was never really about IQ scores at all. It was about what kind of mind should hold power over millions of lives. And in that silence, the audience understood exactly which man had passed the harder test that night on live television. The full weight of what had just unfolded hung heavy in the studio long after the event. Analysts broke down every pause, every facial expression, every shift in tone for days afterward. Social media exploded with side-by-side comparisons of past Trump boasts and Obama's measured replies. Pundits on both sides weighed in, some praising the intellectual depth, others calling it a staged spectacle. But beneath the noise, ordinary viewers felt something shift. The conversation moved from personality to governance, from claims to results. Extended segments replayed the key exchanges, adding expert commentary on psychological patterns of self-promotion in leaders throughout history. Historians drew parallels to past figures who relied on bravado versus those who emphasized steady judgment. Educators used the clip in classrooms to discuss critical thinking and emotional intelligence. Families discussed it over dinner tables, with parents explaining to children the difference between bragging and actual achievement. The moment became a cultural touchstone, referenced in late-night monologues, op-eds, podcasts, and water cooler talks for months. Trump's team issued statements defending the IQ claims with references to past tests and business successes, but the narrative had already pivoted. Obama's words forced a broader examination of leadership qualities that polls soon reflected in shifting public sentiment. Extended interviews with psychologists explained why repeated self-praise can signal underlying insecurity. Economists highlighted how policy outcomes matter more than personal declarations. Veterans and teachers shared stories aligning with Obama's examples of everyday struggles. The script of the evening replayed in slow motion across platforms, with timestamps highlighting the silences that spoke volumes. Commentators noted how Obama's calm demeanor amplified the impact far more than shouting matches ever could. The psychological cage Obama built through logic and empathy became a masterclass in debate strategy taught in communication courses. Viewers who watched the full extended broadcast saw even more layers, including audience reactions, backstage preparations, and follow-up segments that deepened the analysis. This single exchange reshaped discussions on intelligence and politics for years, emphasizing wisdom over boasts, service over self-promotion, and consequences over claims. The night demonstrated that true genius in leadership reveals itself not in words, but in the lives improved, the stability maintained, and the trust earned when the applause fades. The days following the event saw the conversation evolve from viral clips to national introspection as extended breakdowns aired across networks. Obama's response continued to resonate because it touched universal experiences with overconfident leaders in workplaces, communities, and governments. Detailed timelines mapped Trump's past statements against real-world results in areas like economic stability, international relations, and crisis management. Experts dissected the cognitive versus emotional intelligence divide, citing studies showing humility correlates more strongly with effective leadership than raw IQ scores. Personal anecdotes flooded in from viewers who recognized the patterns Obama described in their own lives, from family members who boasted endlessly to bosses who never admitted errors. Trump's counter-appearances emphasized past achievements and dismissed the critique as elitist, but each defense seemed to loop back to the same self-referential style Obama had highlighted. Polls reflected growing public fatigue with spectacle-driven politics and a desire for steadier hands. Late-night hosts replayed the silence moment endlessly, turning it into memes that captured the shift in perception. Schools incorporated segments into civics lessons on rhetoric and substance. The psychological analysis deepened, with professionals explaining narcissistic traits and the exhaustion they create for everyone around them. Obama's reflective close prompted broader discussions on legacy, what leaders leave behind beyond personal branding. Extended family conversations emerged where generations debated what qualities matter most in those who hold power. Media fact checks compared claims to outcomes in healthcare costs, education funding, veteran services, and household expenses, reinforcing Obama's everyday examples. The contrast between performance and service became the dominant frame. Commentators explored how social media amplifies boasts, while real governance requires quiet competence. Historians provided context from previous administrations, showing patterns of humble leaders achieving lasting progress. The event's full transcript and video analysis filled hours of content with time-stamped breakdowns of facial microexpressions, audience shifts, and tonal changes. Viewers reported feeling empowered to question flashy claims in their own lives. The shock value came not from personal attack, but from forcing a higher standard of accountability. As weeks passed, the discussion influenced candidate evaluations, policy debates, and voter priorities. Obama's approach modeled a different kind of strength, one rooted in evidence, empathy, and long-term thinking. The night proved that changing the test changes the outcome, moving from ego validation to public service metrics. This extended examination solidified the moment as a turning point in how Americans discuss intelligence and power. In the longer term, the exchange became a reference point for evaluating future leaders, with Obama's words quoted in debates, books, and training programs for public servants. The emphasis on consequences over claims encouraged more substantive policy discussions and less tolerance for empty boasts. Trump's genius IQ assertions faded into background noise as voters prioritized tangible results in daily life. Documentaries revisited the night with new interviews from audience members, staff, and analysts, uncovering layers of preparation and spontaneous impact. The psychological insight into why people seek constant validation resonated across cultures and professions. Families used the clip to teach children about humility and real achievement. Political strategists studied the calm dissection technique as a model for effective counter-messaging. The silence that followed Obama's key lines symbolized the power of letting ideas land without interruption. Broader societal reflections emerged on the costs of ego-driven leadership, including burnout, division, and eroded trust. Obama's final framing on safety, steadiness, and respect reframed national expectations for those seeking power. The event underscored that maturity, discipline, and judgment matter more than any self-proclaimed score. As the country moved forward, the memory served as a reminder that true intelligence serves others, listens deeply, corrects course, and builds rather than performs. The shock endured not because of drama, but because of clarity, forcing millions to reconsider what leadership should look like when the cameras stop rolling and real lives hang in the balance. Extended reflections in think pieces, academic papers, and community forums kept the conversation alive, ensuring the harder test Obama set that night continued influencing how power is judged for generations. The enduring power of that evening extended far beyond the initial broadcast as analysts, historians, and everyday citizens continued unpacking the layers of Obama's measured response for months afterward. The way he reframed genius from a personal boast into a tool for public service resonated deeply because it addressed a fundamental human frustration with leaders who prioritize image over impact. Extended breakdowns on news panels featured psychologists explaining the Dunning-Kruger effect in high-profile figures, where overconfidence masks gaps in self-awareness. Trump's repeated insistence on his genius IQ, often tied to unverified claims or selective stories about cognitive tests, began to appear less as strength and more as a defensive mechanism when contrasted with Obama's emphasis on outcomes like stable markets, honest crisis communication, and respectful handling of disagreement. Viewers who rewatched the full exchange noticed how Obama's silence after key points allowed the weight of his words to settle, creating space for reflection that shouting matches rarely permit. This technique became a case study in communication workshops, teaching that pauses can be more powerful than volume. Families across the country reported using the clip during dinner discussions to explain to younger generations why humility matters in leadership, sharing personal stories of bosses or politicians whose loud certainty led to poor decisions affecting real lives. Economists contributed segments detailing how policy choices under pressure, rather than self-proclaimed intelligence, determine whether retired couples can afford medications or teachers can stock classrooms without personal expense. Veterans groups highlighted the contrast between claimed genius and months-long wait times for care, amplifying Obama's point that scores mean nothing without judgment. Teachers incorporated the moment into civics classes, encouraging students to debate maturity versus bravado, with assignments analyzing past political claims against measurable results in employment, healthcare access, and community safety. Social media threads evolved from memes of Trump's facial expressions during the uncertainty moment into thoughtful threads dissecting temperament under scrutiny. Late-night hosts produced extended segments replaying the exchange with fact-check overlays, showing how Obama's examples aligned with widespread experiences of rising costs and uncertainty. Political strategists on all sides studied the event as a masterclass in shifting the narrative frame from personality contests to governance effectiveness. Trump's team responded with rallies emphasizing past business deals and poll numbers from supporters, but the public conversation had already moved toward demanding evidence of wisdom through actions rather than assertions. Obama's reflective close, addressing leadership as measured by how safe people feel and how little unnecessary fear enters homes, prompted nationwide essays and podcasts exploring the emotional toll of chaotic governance styles. Historians drew parallels to other eras where confident showmen rose quickly but left instability versus steady leaders who built enduring institutions. The psychological dissection of why constant self-validation becomes exhausting for everyone involved struck a chord, with therapists noting increased client discussions about recognizing similar patterns in personal relationships and workplaces. International observers commented on the uniquely American spectacle while appreciating the universal lesson on ego and power. Documentaries released in subsequent years featured new interviews with audience members who described feeling a shift in real time, realizing the debate transcended politics into questions of character and fitness for responsibility. Academic papers analyzed the rhetoric, noting Obama's use of everyday examples grounded the abstract IQ discussion in tangible human costs. Community forums hosted viewing parties followed by dialogues on what qualities voters should prioritize, leading to greater emphasis on transparency, course correction, and empathy in candidate evaluations. The viral spread of time-stamped clips allowed precise study of how Trump's smile tightened and rhythm faltered, visually confirming the psychological cage Obama constructed through calm logic. This visual evidence proved more compelling than any verbal takedown, as audiences could see the performance crack without needing interpretation. As time passed, the moment influenced training for public officials, stressing the value of listening to experts, admitting uncertainty, and focusing on service over applause.